Hello, everyone, and good whatever moment of this wonderful day you are enjoying on your time zones as you are listening or watching us right now. And it is such a joy to welcome you to a conversation, part of our bonus April series. So, we will be talking today about understanding and engaging Gen Z at work. And this is part of the bonus April series called The Inclusive Workplace. Now, for the next hour or so, we have an amazing lineup of speakers. We have Jessa taking great care of us backstage. So, if you enjoy this conversation, please do make sure that you say a big thank you for Jessa's work. She's really helping us out tremendously. And what we will do, we will bring the speakers up on the stage. And in the meantime, I will ask people just drop us a few comments. First and foremost, we are really curious where you're connecting from. And you will also help us travel vicariously around the world. And last but not least, that would help us know that we are not stuck in some internet backloop in this wild LinkedIn space. And then secondly, please do consider the comments your own conversation space, and whatever it is that we're talking about with the panelists, make sure that you drop us your own thoughts and your own ideas and your own take on the topic, because that is what keeps this community so precious. We learn from each other and we exchange experiences. I see people coming in through the comments, so that's a relief. At least technology works, so we're halfway there. And what we will do, we will try to make the most out of our time today. I see Mary's having a bit of technical difficulties, but we will go agile, not fragile. And let's start with the introduction rounds. So by now you are all old friends and veteran speakers of Hacking HR, so you know the drill. What I will do, I will pass the e-mic around as you appear on my screen clockwise. And I will ask you first, just please shortly introduce yourselves and also indulge in a personal curiosity. When you hear Gen Z, what is the first word that pops in your mind? Anuj, such a joy to see you again. Welcome.
Thanks, Minola. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all my fellow participants as well as my speakers, my panelists. My name is Anuj Kathuria. I'm joining in from Mumbai, India. After having spent 21 years in corporate life, I decided to start my own consulting firm called Cognitio, which works in the area of HR transformation, HR technology, and organizational culture. Minola, the question you asked, I recently read close to 30% of the global workforce today is Gen Z. And this number is going to grow to 50% in the next decade or so. So, the one word that comes to my mind right now when I hear about this is the next wave of disruption.
Mm, thank you so very much. Tracy, what a joy to see you in this conversation. Welcome.
What a joy to see you as well. Thanks. Looking forward to it, you all. I'm Tracy Brower. My PhD is in the area of the sociology of work, how we affect our work, how it affects us. I'm the Vice President of Global Insights for Steelcase, and I write for Forbes and Fast Company. I've got a couple of books. My newest book is called The Secrets to Happiness at Work. I have been in this HR space for a couple of decades, maybe longer than I want to admit. And I think that this is just such an interesting moment for us with things so significantly upside down, inside out, and changing. And for me, Gen Z is about potential.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Stephanie, this panel wouldn't have been the same without you in it.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with all of you. My name's Stephanie Lemick. I'm a former HR executive, and I am now the founder of the Wounded Workforce. It's an organization dedicated to help building trauma-informed workplaces. So you would think the obvious thing to talk about when I think of Gen Z is trauma, but actually the first word I thought of was TikTok.
Wonderful. So we have new wave of disruption, we have potential, and we have TikTok. And I will ask Mary once she's able to rejoin us. Let no one say that Mary doesn't know how to make an entrance. So welcome, Mary. We are just wrapping up the intro. And short introduction, that part I guess you knew by now. But what is one word, the first word that comes to mind when you hear Gen Z?
Oh, what a great question. The first word that comes to mind, Gen Z. God. Oyster. Oyster. From the world is your oyster phrase.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now you made us curious. Tell us something about yourself.
Yes, thank you so much, and apologies for this unexpected entry. Technology let me down, but there is always a backup somewhere. So thank you so much for having me, and so wonderful to share the panel with esteemed guests like everyone today. A little bit about me. I currently head up globally learning and leadership development at Rolls-Royce, civil aerospace and defense and power systems, as part of our multi-year transformation agenda. So I joined the organization last year, held similar roles in the corporate world for the last 15 years, and really great big fan of the hacking HR community. Great to be part of it and great to be here today.
Thank you, everybody, for taking the time and energy to be here and share your insights with us. I will tell everybody in the audience that this question, the one word, the first word that comes to mind when you hear Gen Z, is still open. So feel free to drop us your words in the comments. But before we go very, very deep into the conversation around Gen Z, I was curious because I remember a hacking HR panel from about 2 years ago, and there's still hope for my memory apparently, where we spent quite a bit of time around dismantling the conversation around generations. And we were talking about how slicing up the workforce through generations based on birth dates alone comes with the danger of overgeneralizing. And one of the ideas that was put forward, also based on research, was that it's more about life stages than it's about generations. So I would invite all of you, let's just take a few minutes and talk about what are the benefits, if any, and what are the pitfalls of slicing the workforce through generations. And Stephanie, I'm sure you knew I would go for you first, because the first question, I always go diagonally. I don't know if it's a superstition or what it is, but it is what it is. So, Stephanie.
Perfect. Well, I think generalizations are tough because generalizations do help us kind of have a baseline. So when we think about the generations, it gives us a baseline of understanding. And I like to think about it as it helps us understand the lived experiences of each generation. While each of us have unique lived experiences, there's some commonalities of, things that really are hallmarks of what our experiences are. So as a millennial, I think of my lived experiences, certainly the, terror attacks on September 11th are a hallmark of my generation. The experiences around the Great Recession are a hallmark of my generation. When we look at Gen Z, hallmark of the generation can be they are truly digital natives. So individuals who have spent their entire lives with the access to technology and the internet. Also look at the COVID-19 pandemic as another hallmark or overarching experience that has shaped a lot of what a generation has experienced. And of course, individual preferences, individual lived experiences kind of nestle in there, but it helps us understand our commonalities and our differences across those, ages or stages of life to better relate to individuals. So I think when we think of using generations as a tool versus a box to put people in, that's where it has the greatest potential to support leaders and organizations.
Thank you. Now, unmuting competition is officially open. Let's see who has great fingers. Tracy.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, Stephanie. And I think that lived experience really is the crux of it. And one of the really interesting things about the value of studying generations is the value of studying their reference points and what shapes them. And one of the things I think is so interesting as we think about HR, as we think about work, the current Gen Z has no reference point for what things used to be or what we used to think of as normal, right? Their birth years are from 97 to 2012. So they're between the ages of about 12 to 27 today. So they have no reference point in the way that lots of us have similar reference points to the work experience. So it makes it especially important that we study them and understand that so that we can be informed about how we create, great people practices within the workplace. I do think that we need to be really careful not to overgeneralize. And I'm the, person who always talks about life stage. A lot of times the differences between us are less about how old we are, and they're more about, gosh, do we have kids or nieces, nephews that we're caring for? Do we have, a partner? Do we have a spouse? Are we late career? And, we have different kinds of priorities. And so I think that's important to think about, is not just ages, but also stages. And I think we need to be really careful not to overgeneralize. And I always think that, how sometimes people will say, well, all Zs are like this and all millennials are, those Xers, right? Or whatever. I think that if we would not say in a sentence a generalization that we're about to make about a generation, if we substitute other, like ethnicity or race or anything like that, gender, if we wouldn't make that same generalization about other categories of people, then we shouldn't make that same generalization about Gen Z. There is ample evidence about Gen Z. And of course, the most important differences are between individuals, not groups of individuals. But there is ample evidence about some of their characteristics based on based on their experience, like risk aversion or high levels of loyalty or high levels of preference for independence and choice making. And we'll dig into all those. But I do think it's a both and, right? Like, let's make sure that we're not overgeneralizing, boxing people in, and absolutely make sure that we're applying our best thinking about Gen Z so that we can empower, enable all generations.
Thank you.
Great point, Tracy and Stephanie. I would like to add certain points to that. If we look at the history of work across the 4 industrial revolutions, how has the nature of work evolved versus how has the worker mentality evolved? There's a very fine line between making personas, stereotyping, and the very word trying to generalize things. Everything comes with a pro and a con. If we overgeneralize, we tend to put people in boxes and not get what we are truly looking at. In my opinion, as long as we are able to understand the motives, the drivers, the derailers, with respect to the context and relevance of that era, irrespective of the fact whether it is a Gen X, Gen Y, millennial, baby boomer, you will find there are certain commonalities, yet there are huge differences in the environmental factors. For example, when you look at the baby boomers, right, the nature of work, or for that matter of fact, how the environment was, the key motive and driver was to provide for the family, get a roof on the head, get the basic amenities in the house. Move the next generation, it was about adding certain, peripheries on the plate, maybe a good car or certain amenities in the house. That was a snail mail generation. And like Stephanie said, Gen Z, digital natives, when we talk about that, they perhaps wouldn't even have heard about what snail mail is. They won't even have experienced the kind of life which people experience in 80s, 90s, or for that matter of fact, even early 2000s. So the motives, the drivers, how the nature of work has changed, I think that gives us a lot of impetus and a lot of inputs into why we should generalize, or should we really go and look at creating more personas based on the kind of work people are doing, the maturity of the industry, maturity of the work practice, or for that matter of fact, the maturity of the country where the employee or people are based in. There would be many countries where your Gen Z population is over 50%. And there are countries where Gen Z population is less than 10%, as per a recent survey by World Economic Forum. Now, when you look at the differences between them, the motives and drivers versus what really comes out in terms of work is very, very different in these two scenarios. So I think, in my viewpoint, generalizing things works only till a specific point of time. Beyond that, you have to dig deep, you have to slice and dice basis the key parameters we are looking at. And what are we really trying to achieve as an outcome? Thank you.
Mary, you're in the hot seat of going last.
That's what you get for being late. So all good. I would support everything that Anuj and Tracy and Stephanie have said. Generalizations in general are dangerous, particularly if we want to put a human lens on everything. Then arguably, let's not generalize, because we're all a different person at the end of the day. But for simplification from an organizational point of view, perhaps it is beneficial to sometimes think about it from a what versus how perspective. I do firmly believe that regardless of our age, regardless of our background, regardless of the country we came from and the life experiences that we've had, at some point it boils down to human basic needs of acceptance, being able to provide for yourself and for your family, being able to lead a good, healthy life, whatever the personal definition for you may be. Now, how do we then go about either making these things happen or engaging in the wider society may differ based on what all of you have said before. It may differ on the life experiences we've had, the places that we all came from. So I like to personally apply that what versus how. That what I don't think necessarily changes very much, whether it's generational or not. It's the how. How do I, for example, see what it means to have safety and security in life, whether I'm 20 years old now or whether I'm 65-year-old now. And I picked up on one of the things that Tracy said. I love that you also mentioned about those sweeping statements sometimes that are flying around about Gen Z, and what you kind of brought up in this for me, Tracy, is that, I think sometimes, we forget when we were that age, and it's very easy to sit back and, look at it as at the peripheries and judge, let's put it that way. And that's where I think, the element of compassion and empathy comes in to better talk with each other around some of those topics.
I did feel the energy towards talking about Gen Z. So a special thank you for indulging this round of context setting for a conversation about generations. And Tracy, I was this close from pulling you back from talking about Gen Z before, but I was happy to see that telepathy works. So I would invite you to lead us into this part of the conversation about how does Gen Z show up at work differently in comparison to the other ages and stages of life?
Yeah, I love this question. And I love your phrasing of it. How do they show up differently? Like, one of the things that we know is that there's so much research on what Gen Z, what all of the generations want from work. And we all want really similar things, but our priority order of those is different. So Gen Z shows up and they want career development, visibility, mentoring. They want to build their social capital. That's a high priority for them. And we all care about that, no matter how old we are, no matter what our stage is in life. Mid-stage, people tend to prioritize performance. I got to get in, get out, do the daycare dash at 5, do the elder care dash at 5. I'm threading all the needles, kind of mid-stage. And late-stage, people prioritize things like leaving a legacy, being a mentor, being part of organizational memory. But those early stage Gen Zs really want to kind of start making their mark, start building their career, really learning from others as one of their highest priorities. They also want a sense of purpose. They want learning and growth. They want connection. They want to be able to get feedback so that they can be developing all the time. Those are also things that we know they want. The other things that we know from research, there's some beautiful longitudinal research that doesn't just compare, look at how 20-year-olds are different than 30-year-olds or 40-year-olds or 50-year-olds or whatever, because of course there are differences there. But this longitudinal study looks at how are 20-year-olds today different than 20-year-olds 10 years ago or, previously. Like how is this generation unique? And one of the things we know is that they tend to be more risk averse. So when we can create situations where they have high levels of psychological safety in the culture, where we can create situations where leaders are reinforcing them, those really help, so that people can bring forward their best selves and get past that risk aversion so they can have great conversations and learning from others. Another thing that tends to be characteristic of this generation uniquely is is their mental health issues. Like if you look at all of the data on mental health lately, and there is tons, they have the highest ever levels of depression, anxiety, suicide, dis-ease, mal-ease. And so I think we really need to take that into consideration in terms of creating cultures, creating people practices, creating organizations where people can bring their best and have inclusive environments regardless of kind of where they're at in their personal journey. And then they just have they have a lot of emphasis on accountability for the organization. They want to know not just what's the job I'm doing and, who am I working for, but how is my organization serving the community? How is my organization stewarding the environment? How is my organization showing up in terms of its values, both internally and externally? So just some interesting things in terms of how they're showing up. And the thing I think is also a takeaway is when we create great conditions for Gen Z, we're creating great conditions for lots of different generations, right? We can bring our best, we can have psychological safety, we can take appropriate risks, we can, build connections for better mental health. That's good for all generations.
What a great spoiler alert for a question that I had part for later on. Stephanie, I see you unmuted.
I think it's so perfect how you've outlined, Tracy, that a lot of what Gen Z is looking for is what a lot of us were looking for when we were first starting our careers. We're looking for development. We're looking for mentorship. We're looking to grow. And that is consistent. I think that, again, that, like you said, gets to those stages. I think what's really interesting is some of the ways, we saw millennials show up. And as a millennial, I feel like I got super tired of hearing about how millennials showed up at work. So we're hopeful we don't quite do that with Gen Z, but how we showed up differently. And I love the way you highlighted mental health because, well, I think, yes, there are some serious concerns as it relates to mental health for Gen Z. I also think what we're seeing is a normalization around conversations about mental health. So part of the increase in statistics, the increase in diagnosis is the willingness to raise hands. And, I said TikTok when I thought of Gen Z because Gen Z is on TikTok talking about their lives, their experiences, and talking about some of the hard stuff that people kind of, clutch their pearls when someone says the word trauma. Gen Z is ready to talk about it. And I think that is a really big change when we think about the workplace. We all have mental health. Organizations should be considering mental health for their full teams. Gen Z is going to show up in a way where they expect mental health and their whole person to be able to show up at work. That's a non-negotiable for them. In fact, there's this fantastic survey that came out earlier this year from Monster.com. They surveyed new grads, Gen Z new grads, and 92% of their respondents said that it's important for them to feel comfortable discussing mental health at work. And they would quit. 59% of that same group would quit if they felt a workplace became toxic. So this is really this non-negotiable where Gen Z wants all of those things we want in our early stage of our career, but they're showing up in a way where it's being able to bring our whole self to work, talk about, challenges, not kind of separate or compartmentalize those things. We're going to have to be ready to talk about it. And I think a real challenge here is managers don't have the tools and resources to manage frequently in general. We don't provide them with the right tools and resources. Now we have a group of employees joining the workforce in droves, and they want to talk about everything, including mental health. How do we upskill them and how do we support those leaders so they're prepared to have those conversations in a way that can help everyone be successful?
Mary.
It's certainly a generation that want to work to live, not live to work. I think they looked a lot at their parents, how their parents operated or still operate in the world of work. And I don't think they necessarily want that same daily operating model, let's put it that way, for themselves. I am very kind of committed to the young talent out there. I spend quite a lot of time with young people wherever I can, pull them to different pieces of work wherever I can. And just recently, someone invited me to his podcast. He created a fantastic platform, a podcast where he brings in leaders from different places all over the world, different industries, regardless. And he provides a platform for Gen Z to hear to some of their stories and so on and so on. And I remember when we were preparing for it a little bit, I said to him, "So George, what do you really want from this hour together as we'll be recording the podcast?" And he said to me, and that wasn't the first time I heard it, but he said to me, "Mary, we just want some real talk." And I think really what this means, and it kind of links it back to what Tracy and Steph have said already, they are not afraid to speak truth to power. I would say, in comparison to perhaps, how maybe they're, people before them operated, but they have those very high expectations of organizations and leaders in those organizations, and they crave a little bit of that back, to just be told as it is, for leaders to be more direct with them. And yeah, so these were just a couple of thoughts that Steph and Tracy inspired in what they said.
Thank you. Anuj.
I believe this is the experience generation. That's what I call them. I'll say why. Because for them, what matters most is not what they do, it's the how part. How they do what they do. There is so much emphasis on the how part, which kind of sums up what Tracy and Mary were talking about. How they show up for work. That how part, that qualitative experience, that is what matters most to them as compared to the earlier generations. Now, for example, when I was in my early career, if I would be scared to go and challenge my leadership if I thought that they are making a wrong decision, or for that matter of fact, there is a better way of doing things, I would think 10 times before doing it. In my time, I would say 20, 25 years ago. But is that the case today? No. This generation wants transparency, wants autonomy, loves to challenge status quo. Because for them, it's the quality of experience. It's not about the length of experience. It's about quality in every moment that they live, that they work. And that's what really defines them, in my opinion, as compared to and kind of distinguishes them from every other generation, only with this very specific aspect.
I want to build. I'm sorry. I want to build on what you just said, because I think something that's really interesting and an important nuance about Gen Z is we have individuals in the workplace who have built amazing careers and have all this knowledge from experience. And that's how you gain knowledge. For most of us in our careers, it's through experience. Gen Z has knowledge at their fingertips and has for their entire life. And so I think one thing that can be hard and can be challenging is, for many of us, there's this respect, there's this awe of someone who has had many years of experience, all of this knowledge. And it's not the same, it's not a lack of respect, it's a different relationship that Gen Z has with experience and with knowledge. And I think that's, for me, I've got Gen Z stepdaughters. Sometimes I have to stop myself and go, it's not about me. It's about their different relationship with knowledge. And it just helps with that understanding. So I love what you said, because it's just such a good way to consider how the generation is showing up differently.
Right.
Well, and I love that. That's really cool. It's the knowledge at their fingertips and the experience, right? And there's the dynamic tension between those. And I think the really critical thing in all these generational conversations is that it's both, right? Like, sometimes I think our our human instinct is to kind of look at the last people through the door and, bright, shiny Gen Zs and, they've got all the answers, right? Never mind all that experience stuff. But I think we have to really bring it together and say, oh my gosh, they have new ways of knowing. They have new knowledge at their fingertips. And experience still matters. And we still need to value and not over index on valuing any one generation, so that we're really building cultures of inclusivity, of respect, of collaborating based on all the different positives that we bring. So absolutely agree with everything you just said. And I think it's so important that we value all of it versus saying, oh, today now it's about this thing. It wasn't about that thing, or it's not anymore about that thing.
It's about all the things. And I want this conversation to shift from how Gen Z changes the workplace to we have the most generations in the workplace we've ever had. How can we completely change for the better? Because we can, with that combination you said, Tracy, of that experience of all of this knowledge, and then that new set of experience we have with Gen Z with knowledge at their fingertips. I'm so excited. I love that.
There's a fundamental challenge here in, Tracy, what you and Stephanie have mentioned, and I've experienced this many a times. See, our generation had to work hard for knowledge acquisition, skill acquisition, right? Today, the challenge is not about knowledge acquisition. It's available free of cost. Thanks to Google and the WhatsApp universities, it's available at your whims and fancies. The challenge today's generation has to face is to find order amongst chaos. For the same piece, you would have 20 different solutions or 20 different point of views available. Now, our generation tried, failed, experimented, tried, failed, experimented. So we knew that there are 90 different ways not to do a thing and only 4 different ways to do it correctly. But for today's generation, they would say, okay, you know what? We know there are 100 ways to do it. The challenge for them is to figure out when they actually go and implement certain things and then they fail. That is what causes, as one of the biggest causes of depression. That the ability to withstand, the ability to sustain failure, to fail fast, though its term has been thoroughly abused, fail fast and learn. In reality, when you look at the number of cases where Gen Z has gone into depression and taken untoward steps, it's primarily because of not being able to handle failures properly, because they were not able to withstand that, the very emotion of, okay, how can I be wrong? I know this, I cannot be wrong. That has been, at least in many research papers I've gone through, being highlighted as the biggest area for them, the biggest concern for them, to find order into chaos in this today's disrupted ecosystem of knowledge and skills. And how do they stay relevant? More important, how do they stay relevant?
I absolutely love when my role as a moderator becomes completely irrelevant and I can just lean back and relax. I believe that's the biggest sign of a meaningful conversation, growing into its own life. And thank you so very much for taking this topic to the point where I was actually gonna ask, what have you witnessed Gen Z struggling with most in the workplaces? And have you seen some meaningful, intentional ways to address it? And Mary, I did saw you unmuted, so I do hope that this is a natural progression for what you wanted to share.
You got it, Manola. Whatever you say goes. I follow your lead. Yes. So to your question, Manola, personal resilience. Let me add a little bit here. I think it's fantastic that knowledge acquisition topic came out. It's a blessing and a curse for this, for all of us, to be honest with you, because it brought about an unprecedented level of transparency and and democratized, arguably, accessibility to information. Sorry, which I think is one of the key reasons why younger generations show up a lot more bold and particularly in front of leadership, because they know more than we've ever known before. Knowledge is not, or information is not necessarily an exclusive thing anymore that's held by a very exclusive, narrow group of people and organizations. Most information can be found freely in the public domain. So that, on the one hand, is that blessing. The curse of it, on the other hand, I think, is that the younger generations, they are digitally native. They grew up overstimulated. They grew up with seeing everything and anything in the world, and they developed a habit of just constantly comparing themselves to everyone else, and that has an impact on their personal resilience. If I haven't achieved a whole laundry list of things by the age of 25, I must be doing something wrong, and it means I'm a failure, because you know what? I'll go on my phone and I'll find a million examples of people who have achieved those things by age 25. And there is very rarely a second thought where deconstructs those sweeping statements that actually we touched on at the very beginning of the conversation today. And they rarely stop and think, well, maybe these people had access to different opportunities. Maybe these people are on their own personal journey. And apart from what you see that they want to show you on social media, you absolutely know nothing about the reality. And to what extent can you actually validate these days that the information that people freely share in public domain is 100% true? So for me, personal resilience, to answer your question, Manola.
Thank you.
Mary, I love what you brought up here, because I think I've long held, as you know, an HR practitioner. I used to joke and say my first career job, my first role in my career, I referred to it as the rude awakening. And I used to joke, that first role out of college or training, what have you, that first career job, it's kind of a rude awakening, because there's what we think we know and then the reality of it. And I think there are a couple of things working really hard against Gen Z understanding some of the realities, some of the unglamorous realities of work. And I think you point to it really well in terms of social media. There's a lot out there on social media where people can point to, this was my experience, or this is what I did, or this is what you should do, or let me present myself as an expert without any credentials around work and how to relate to work. And I see that a lot, and I think that's very challenging. And it's a lot of information to sift through and really understand what is real. I also will say the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic. We had a great question from our listeners around, how did COVID-19 impact folks and how they showed up at school or showed up at work? Well, they didn't get to show up in person. And all of us are kind of re-navigating what the workplace looks like, how we communicate, how we interact. And it's almost like I say, COVID was like the shaking of the snow globe, and we're still seeing those snowflakes settle. The entirety of Gen Z's career has been in that kind of tumultuous, not sure environment. So how can they, through their own experience, kind of normalize what work really is? So I think those two things make it really complicated, to jump in that rude awakening first role and not really get clear answers. Because I think of that first job for me, a year in, I had a lot of answers I didn't have. But for folks who've been working now for 3 or 4 years, there's so much change. There's so much influx. What is normal? What can they expect? at work, and it feels uncomfortable. I think that that's really challenging. And I think that pushes a lot of this questioning, pushes some of these, norms we're seeing with Gen Z around loyalty or lack of risk taking, different things. And really what they want is clarity around what to expect. And I think the more organizations and leaders can do that, the better they'll be able to relate to these individuals.
Stephanie, thank you for your comments. If I may, because you brought something back up in my memory. Again, going back to because it's very fresh in my mind because we were just recording it a week ago or so, and it came up in the conversation, and I asked, to George in that moment, who promised you that it will be easy? That was the question that I posed to them, and we entered into a really interesting conversation off the back of that. But again, going back to some of what you said there, Steph, they are exposed through social media to so many stories, and no one really likes to share stories of the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into, say, getting to the top, right? Or most of the time we hear great stories, when people, crop up after many, many years of trying and failing and trying other things and so on. Or we hear stories about the next unicorn startup, but no one likes to talk about how many hundreds, if not thousands, of startups before that one unicorn emerged actually tried and didn't succeed. And that's also, okay. But there is that expectation, I think, in the younger generation because of the world in which they grew up in, that somehow someone is always going to make things easy for them. And I did ask them very directly, who promised you that it will be easy? And if anyone ever has, then they really did a big, big disservice to this generation.
I feel like we're already rehearsing for the mic drop moments with dropping these gems. So, Tracy, Anuj, how would you like to contribute to this one? Anuj.
For me, I already said, one is the factor of resilience, not being able to accept failures in the right spirit. I've observed that a lot. Number two, which would take what Mary and Stephanie said to the next level, given that they are digital natives and they face a lot of social media pressure from all corners. Many times I have observed this very acute phenomena in Gen Z to be able to distinguish between what is digital life and what is real life. They are not able to distinguish between that. Because the way you interact, the way you behave on social platforms and digital platforms is not the way you would do when you are with somebody live. I think that distinction is getting blurred day by day, at least for them.
I think it's the same for them. I think it's the same. And I think that's what's so challenging is for most of us, it is how we show up digitally and how we show up in real life. And I think for Gen Z, for so many of them, not to overgeneralize, for so many of them, it is the same. And so it can become very challenging then to navigate when people are not showing up genuinely on social media. Yeah.
So you might have 10,000 friends socially, right? Online on a digital platform. And you talk to them on WhatsApp or TikToks of the world or other applications. But what kind of behavior do you really exhibit when you really meet somebody face to face? I think that social behavior quotient has gone down the drain. That level of emotional intelligence is somewhere missing. I mean, there's a balance between IQ and EQ. You cannot have these two at extremes. Otherwise, you have anarchists or narcissists, right? What is happening here, what I've observed in certain corners, is amazing in terms of IQ, but the EQ is all warped, actually warped. So when you put them to challenging situations, right, how do you rationalize those when you are in a physical environment face to face? I think they struggle with that. I've seen many people struggling. And then the only way out, or the way for them to vent out, or to ease up, is go on social media and bash XYZ person, whether naming it or not naming it, or hit a pub, because you do not have a channel of communication with your physical friends. Somewhere down the line, that realm is reducing day by day. That's what I've seen. Number three, the biggest challenge I've seen is, you know there is always this hurry for the next thing. The patience level is not there. There was a time we said patience is a virtue. For them, patience is not a virtue. I'm done with this, what next? I'm done with this, what next? I'm done with this, what next? So the ability to see things sail through, I'm not seeing that. It's good. You want challenge after the challenge. Okay, I've solved a problem. Give me next, give me next, give me a bigger problem, which is fantastic. But at least see the results of the solution that you have implemented. Is it working or not? That patience level I have not seen. At least for me, these are three biggest areas. And yes, mental health definitely being at the top.
Thank you. Tracy.
Oh my gosh, Anuj, I'm like, I've got this like word patience written down in addition to agreeing with everything everybody else has said. But yeah, like the development of the ability to be patient, I think is a really good one that we don't talk a lot about. I think a lot of things, Manola, back to your original question, like what are they struggling with and what have we seen kind of help that? I think another thing they struggle with is relationship skills. And that has been a direct outcome of COVID, right? Like distance has created distance. And we all come back with some level of social jet lag. I wrote an article about that. But I think when organizations can take steps to build skills in, attending to people and paying attention and reading nonverbals, when we can build space for personal one-on-one conversations where we build trust, give feedback, ask questions, when we build skills among leaders, where leaders are able to bring teams together in meaningful ways and do projects together. Those skills in relating, I think Gen Z struggles with potentially more than others because of their life experience. And I think the companies that are doing it really well, the organizations that are doing really well, are reinforcing those skills of asking questions, paying attention, putting away your device, spending time with people, prioritizing relationships, seeking feedback, all those kinds of things. So relationship skills are one area of struggle. I think another area is stress. I think like one of the things we can do, and totally agree, like there's a really old song. It was old when I was young. It was called I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. And it's kind of that thing, right? But I think we have the opportunity to normalize stress. The happiness paradox is that some of the most fulfilling things are also some of the hardest things. And so to believe that we're doing it wrong if we're not on easy street, we're absolutely setting ourselves up to fail. So how do we reinforce, oh my gosh, it's a really hard project and we're, rolling up sleeves and burning midnight oil, and that is fulfilling. I think we have the opportunity to reinforce hard work, good work, recognize our individual contributions to a team, recognize and celebrate when the team wins, learn from failures, and be open to talking about failure. And I would say the third thing we need to do is really get better at dialogue. Like I think a lot of times Gen Z has been sort of conditioned that anything that's uncomfortable is something you just get to remove yourself from, right? But we can innovate best and learn best when we can actually disagree with each other in constructive ways. Like, I love you, I respect you, and I totally disagree with your opinion, right? And let's come together, and I want to hear what you have to say, and you want to hear what I have to say. When we create the conditions in organizations where we can really listen to different points of view and learn from different points of view and come to compromises when that's appropriate. I think that makes a really big difference. And that is a skill also I think that we can build, especially among Gen Zs, because they may not have been exposed to a lot of debate or dialogue in the same ways that other generations have been.
Well, this is without a shadow of a doubt the absolute shortest hacking HR hour I have experienced to date, because I can't believe we're about 8 minutes away from saying goodbye. And I'm like, no. We need at least 10 more hours to start easing into the topic. I was thinking about the next question, and I guess the classic way to ask it would be, what is the kind of support that Gen Z need within the workplace? But in full honesty, I don't really feel like doing classic today, so I will put a spin to it. I would ask each of you, maybe take a minute and a half, and mention one area of support for Gen Z and also one support boundary that organizations should have in place for Gen Z. And I will give you just a few seconds to think about. In the meantime, I will thank everybody in the audience for being here. And before we start getting that question, as we will wrap up, this conversation is being recorded, and you can go back and enjoy it again or recommend it to maybe your Gen Z colleagues, either through our LinkedIn space or hackinghrlab.io. And in the interest of time, I will pass the e-mic around. We will do this just as we started. So one way in which organizations should support Gen Z, and one support boundary from organizations to Gen Z. Anuj.
I think one way to support is build their social skills, what we call truly human skills. And which is a combination of a lot of different things, co-creation, empathy, relationship development, conversation skills, plethora of skills over there in the social skills or the truly human skills conundrum. Boundary, I would say, I would add something more to that, which is a mandate. Build in experiences for them where you fail them. They experience failure and how to rise, how to come up again, stand up again after being hit. Build that resilience to tackle failures. The combination of social skills, whether it is creative intelligence, social intelligence, or generative intelligence, or the EQ, combined with them to have experiences of failures and how to deal with failures, will definitely help them a long way in building their mental health and help organizations realize their true potential in true sense.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Tracy.
I think we can absolutely offer support by creating safe spaces for dialogue, safe spaces where we're going to come together and, like really debate a topic and learn from each other. I think really creating those intentionally would be very cool. For me, a boundary is that I think we shouldn't lower the bar. Like, we may have Gen Zs who come in and say, oh, I'm really stressed, or, oh, I couldn't get it done, or, oh, that feels too hard. And I think we need to keep our boundary high, keep our expectations high, and let them know that we believe they will bring their best and that they will be able to perform and they do have the capability. So I think a really important boundary is holding them accountable and keeping the bar appropriately high to empower them.
Wonderful. Stephanie.
I have maybe an interesting take on what I think organizations should do, but I think the biggest things organizations can do is not make assumptions about how we've done things in the past being the right way moving forward. So, for example, I would challenge folks, don't assume because our relationships, we rely heavily on relationships that are in person, that digital or virtual relationships aren't meaningful, or do not think that, social skills that are virtual social skills are not valuable and shouldn't be integrated. And finding that bridge, that common ground. How do we connect how we've done things to how we'll do things going forward? I think creating that openness, again, looks at how we maximize the value of this amazing opportunity of all these generations in the workforce at the same time. When I think of a boundary, I think the flip side of that, as much as Gen Z is going to pull the workplaces into the future, I think there's a pushback, and that it cannot be exactly everything that you hope and want it will be, especially not instantly. I think patience comes back again. And it's about finding that balance and creating workplaces that work for everyone, including generations that are not part of Gen Z, including the generations that come after them. So I think that boundary is understanding the push and pull, that it's not Gen Z completely reshapes the workplace just for Gen Z. It's completely reshaping the workplace for the future.
Thank you so much. Mary, bring us home, but otherwise no pressure.
No, never any pressure from Manola here. Again, I love what Anuj said, and Tracy and Stephanie. Some really beautiful contributions here. So I think from that support area, I really want to echo what all three have said, and create those really specific opportunities, right? So again, for example, I don't know if George is on. He said he would be, but sorry, George, to bring you up for the third time. But George has been in charge of standing up a reverse mentorship program with our support, where we're going to be matching our interns and graduates with the top 100 executives in our organization. So again, whatever the idea, make it happen. Keep it simple and make it happen. Get it off the ground. It will evolve over time. Don't overthink it too much and just go for it, I say. And in terms of those support boundaries, I think I'm going to really echo what Tracy said here, not to create those false expectations, that everything is going to be easy, and create that level of accountability that Tracy was talking about. And the final thing I would say is help them understand that life is not a problem to be solved, but it is to be experienced. And I think with that mindset, it also helps to kind of alleviate perhaps some of the pressures that we put upon ourselves, regardless of our generations, that there is some finite moment at which all of our problems will be solved. And as Buddha said, there's always 89 problems. So I'll leave you with Buddha today.
Thank you so very much, Tracy, Stephanie, Mary, Anuj, and George, for being our panelists here today. And thank you, everybody in the audience. I am sure that we spanned across generations today. And I will wrap it up with a small confession. You made me smile so many times because I was listening to all these statements about generations. And if I flip them on their head, I just realized how many times I carbon dated myself with things that I said out loud in the presence of other generations. It was absolutely wonderful. Once again, a wholehearted thank you to our panelists. A wholehearted thank you to our audience. Jessa, you were wonderful again. And I hope I will get to welcome as many of you as possible in many, many future conversations. Thank you. And experience life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manola. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.